how do I manage side effects? So obviously, y'all, this question it could be a topic all by itself. And so I'm going to give a super kind of broad non-answer because it is so dependent on who you are. So side effects are basically anything that happens to you. Well, most times, I guess the technical idea of a side effect is that it's anything that happens that changes one state to another, because that's an effect. And the side effect generally is when you change your state from this state to this state, and it's not pleasant. That's what we define a side effect to be of a medicine or of a therapy or that sort of thing. So generally, it's an unpleasant experience. When it comes to medicine, so we do our best as clinicians and as people who write for medicines, we do our best to make sure that you know all the common ones. Now, this is where it gets kind of tricky, is because like every medicine was not tested in every person on the planet. And so the way they come up with their list of like common side effects is they take a sampling of people, which is a fancy statistical way of saying they look at the general population and then they try to get people that reflect the general population. And then they use medicines and put them through clinical trials, or it's basically a way to make sure that the medicines are going to be safe. And if there are things that happen, the people in the studies will report, hey, it made my stomach hurt, or hey, it gave me a headache. And if there's a certain amount of those people that report similar issues, then they will say, oh, that's a common side effect of a particular medicine. Um, I'm like super oversimplifying this stuff. I'm not a statistician. I think statistics is really hard, and I hated that class, and I still hate it. But did I mention that I hate it? But there are people who do this stuff all the time, and they reassure us using all of their statistics that this is the case. And so if there's a medicine that has a listed side effect, they are generally more apt to happen than not likely, because again, most side effects are not very common, unless they are. Anyway, to bring it all to conclusion, so when most medicines, or quite a few, well, every medicine has a side effect. So that's a universal. Every medicine has a risk of causing something that it was not intended to cause. And the cue or the clue that we use is we try to give you all the common ones, right? And so, if you start a medicine that works on serotonin, you may have an upset stomach or diarrhea, stuff like that. But it's not comprehensive. Like if we sat down and gave you every side effect of everything, you would never leave your doctor's appointment, because somebody's had something at some point. And so that's why we choose the common ones. And then if you're having it, we try to mitigate it, which means we try to lessen the chance that that's happening, either by lowering the dose or switching you to something else. The key is we don't want you to feel uncomfortable. We don't want there to be an unpleasant effect from taking a medicine. And so we encourage you to speak up when you go into your doctor or your clinician and say, hey, this is what's going on. Is that a side effect? Is this a risk? And most times they're going to be able to explore that with you. Now, there are certain times where I hear things and I'm like, that's unusual. Like, for example, hey, I took this stimulant and I got really sleepy. And I go, that's not very common. Is sleepiness a side effect of a stimulant? Well, not according to what you read, but anything, I guess, is possible. And so context is the second part that any clinician is going to take into advisement. So, what is the context of you taking a stimulant and falling asleep? Is it after 3 days of you being awake? Well, then, yeah, you're going to probably fall asleep because you're tired. But so side effects are always in context. And if you have a side effect that your clinician didn't tell you about, again, more than likely it's because it's not very common, but you can always ask your clinician, hey, this is what happened. Is this common? Is this serious? That sort of thing. And then, of course, be very careful what you read on the internet. And I cannot stress this part enough, is that when you're in chat rooms or when you're in, the Book of Faces groups, those can be very problematic because people will tend to say things happen at much higher rates than the science shows. And so be very careful on the Book of Faces, which is why I officially do not like the Book of Faces. I wish they would just delete that whole thing, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other day. So, in conclusion, when it comes to side effects, yes, they happen. How do you manage them? You get with your clinician to make sure that you have all of the data, and then they will work with you to try to decrease those side effects as much as possible.